Dr. Amanda. I'm a naturopathic doctor, and I host this live health Q&A to answer any questions that you might have. So feel free to ask any questions, drop them in the chat. I'm going to be chatting a little bit about cortisol. I usually pick a different topic, something to chat about. But you can ask me any questions in regards to other health concerns. Maybe you have questions about supplements, vitamins, different lab testing. You can ask any different type of health questions. Just leave your questions in the chat and I will do my best to answer them. So one thing I wanted to talk about is cortisol, because I think there's a lot of information on social media about cortisol, people saying like your cortisol is high, and if you have high cortisol then you have these symptoms, which can be true. So you could potentially have an issue with cortisol, either high or low. So we'll talk about that a little bit and what some symptoms look like, and testing as well, because there could be an overlap with some of these symptoms and other conditions as well. So if anybody's just joining us, hi and welcome. I'm Dr. Amanda. I'm a naturopathic doctor, and I host this live health Q&A to answer any health questions. So welcome. Feel free to put your questions in the chat box and I will answer them. And I'm going to talk a little bit about cortisol. So first of all, why don't we talk about what cortisol is? So cortisol is a hormone, and it is released from your adrenal glands. So these are the glands that are on top of your kidneys. They release cortisol, and cortisol is actually a very important hormone. It helps with regulating our energy, our sleep-wake cycle. It helps with blood sugar regulation as well. Many different things in the body, cortisol can be a big component of. Then there tends to be an issue, which some people think of when they hear like cortisol issues. They think, okay, high cortisol, what can that cause? Well, if it is high, then you might have issues of burnout, like feeling really fatigued, issues with your weight, maybe some weight gain, feeling fuller in the face or looking fuller in the face. So some of these are an imbalanced cortisol type of picture. There could be also the alternative where maybe you have really low or lower levels of cortisol. That can show up as things like fatigue, having cravings for salt, having issues with your blood pressure, so low blood pressure. So these are some things to kind of keep in mind. Like there can be a difference in the symptoms of a cortisol imbalance. The best thing to do is always just get it checked. So getting your blood work checked, or your saliva or your urine for your cortisol. So we'll talk about that in a little bit, what that would look like. But let me just see if there's any questions, and I will get back to that. Okay, does running help to lower your cortisol? I will say exercise in general can help with supporting cortisol. So if you're somebody that's very stressed out, anxious, whatever exercise works for you, whatever you enjoy doing is going to help with balancing out your cortisol, whether it be high or low. Now, there's some talk about, if you have cortisol issues, you shouldn't be doing high intensity exercise, or you should only be doing a certain type of exercise. I would say that could be true to some extent, but I think it's still important to be getting good cardiovascular exercise. So maybe you're going to do something like running or swimming, or playing sports, versus doing those high burst intensity trainings. And then also having a balance of that. So don't just burn yourself out with high cardio or HIIT. Have a balance of doing other things like yoga, stretching, mindfulness, relaxation, weight training, strength training. I would say all of that, just having a good, healthy workout routine with a balance of different exercises can help with cortisol and hormone support. But yeah, great question. Okay, if anybody's just joining us, hi and welcome. I'm Dr. Amanda. I'm a naturopathic doctor. I host this live health Q&A to answer any health questions that you may have. So tonight I'm talking a little bit about cortisol, but feel free to ask any other health questions that you might have in the chat, and I will be able to answer them. So the other thing I wanted to talk about cortisol was the type of testing, or what types of tests should you do to know if you have high or low cortisol. So I kind of mentioned there's three different ways you can test it. One would be in the blood, then the other one would be in the urine, and then the other one would be in the saliva. So generally, if you're doing a blood test, you'd have to go get it done at 8 a.m. And then get it done again at around 4 p.m. And that's because just checking the cortisol at two different points in the day. So the inconvenience there is you have to go get a blood draw twice in a day, and it's kind of just giving you a snapshot of the cortisol in that moment at time. So generally, blood work for cortisol is one that I don't always use firsthand. I find that either doing the saliva or the urine can get better results. So if you're going to do a saliva or urine cortisol test, the benefit of that is you're going to get a reading at 4 different points of the day. So you'll actually have to do the test, and you usually do this at home. So you would do it like upon waking, then usually a couple hours after waking, then later in the evening, and then before bed at night. So it's going to give you a snapshot of what your cortisol looks like all throughout the day. So generally what should happen is cortisol should start rising, and then it will like go down and start falling later in the evening, and then it should be low at night. So the purpose of cortisol, if you have a good cortisol response, is it should get you out of bed in the morning. It usually spikes around 8, around that time, and that's when you should have some energy. And then it starts to dip off in the afternoon, so it starts coming down that curve, and that's why sometimes we feel a little bit of like that fatigue in the afternoon around 2-3 p.m. It could be related to your cortisol coming down, but then it should be low in the evening and low at night. If you have high cortisol in the evening, or if you feel like tired and wired, that could mean that potentially your cortisol is a little bit higher in the evening than what it should be. So generally cortisol in the evening should be low, and that way you're able to feel rested and relaxed and ready for bed. So that's kind of how the cortisol curve looks. So when you get it tested through, whether that be the urine or the saliva, you're going to be able to see it at those different points of the day, and you can see if maybe you're higher in the morning than you should be, or maybe you're lower, and vice versa. So it's really beneficial that way. Okay, so I'm just seeing some new people jump in. So hi and welcome. I'm Dr. Amanda. I'm a naturopathic doctor. I host this live health Q&A to answer any health questions that you have. Thank you for the likes. I do appreciate that. It does help get the video noticed across the YouTube algorithm, so that way more people can join us and ask more health questions, and we can learn about many different things. So today I'm chatting about cortisol, but if you have any other health questions, just feel free to drop them in the comment box, and I will be able to answer them for you. All right. And if you are also new here, be sure to subscribe, join the community. I do go live frequently, so if you are subscribed and have notifications on, then you can get notified when I go live again, and I can help out with any health questions you have. So there's a question: what are the most common diseases associated with high cortisol? So there is actually like a true medical disease, Cushing's syndrome, when you have high cortisol level to the point where it causes a lot of concerns, and you usually have to take medication or do something to help lower it. So when I'm talking about, we have a little bit of a cortisol imbalance, like that's not the true medical issue of having high cortisol. So that's just kind of to clarify that. Generally, like if you have a cortisol imbalance, or if you have an issue with either high or low cortisol, it's not to the point where it's a medical issue. Whereas on the other hand, if you have a really low cortisol, it's something called Addison's disease. And again, like you usually need to be on medication and be treated for that. So I'm just talking about kind of the general term of, you might hear adrenal fatigue or cortisol imbalance, and that just means that when you get your testing done, maybe there's a little bit of a slight issue with your cortisol levels. So just to clear that up, it's not Cushing's and it's not Addison's disease that I'm talking about, but those are two true medical conditions that have to do with cortisol. On the other hand, like if we're just talking about general cortisol, what are some conditions that may be associated with Higher cortisol. So I'd say I've seen this in issues of hormonal imbalances in women and in men. Like, let's say you have really low levels of testosterone, or in women you have higher levels of testosterone, or maybe you have ovulatory issues where you're not ovulating every month. I'd say in those cases, I've seen high cortisol associated with both of those. So, because cortisol, again, it is a hormone, I see a lot of connection with hormone imbalances all across the board there. The other thing is insulin resistance, diabetes. Again, insulin is another hormone. So whenever we're looking at hormones, we want to not just look at one specific one, we want to have a look at the other hormones. So in terms of insulin resistance, that would be like having high insulin and not being able to balance out your blood sugar that well. I see some correlation there with higher cortisol or just issues with cortisol. So great question about that. Okay, if anybody's just joining us, hi and welcome. Thank you for the likes. I do appreciate that. It helps get the video noticed across our YouTube algorithm. And if you're new here, I'm Dr. Amanda. I'm a naturopathic doctor. I host these live health Q&As to answer any health questions that you have. So today I'm talking about cortisol, but if you had other questions about different health conditions, supplements, diet, lab testing, anything you were curious about, just feel free to ask me in the chat and I'll be able to answer them for you. All right. So I was talking a little bit about cortisol and like how to test it. So if anybody's just jumping on, I do usually recommend the saliva or the urine. Actually, usually saliva is one of the ones I go to for testing for cortisol, and I find that gives pretty good accurate results, and it tests it throughout the day, so you're able to see your cortisol curve. All right, question about how to help lowering cortisol other than exercise. Yeah, so there's herbs. Usually herbs are helpful to help with lowering cortisol. So some of these herbs include things like relora, rhodiola, ashwagandha are pretty common ones. Some other ingredients like L-theanine is a good amino acid, really nice calming for the nervous system. Magnesium is another one I usually recommend, like looking into the different forms of magnesium, but the one that I find helpful for cortisol is the glycinate. At least around 250 milligrams to 500 milligrams a day of that one. So magnesium is really good for helping out with the nervous system. If you have issues sleeping, if you feel really restless at night, magnesium is a really good one. In terms of the herbs, the ones I mentioned, relora, ashwagandha, rhodiola, those can be taken daytime and nighttime. You don't always just have to take them at nighttime. Because these ones aren't going to cause you to be sleepy. They just help with support, like a good grounding energy support. So that's rhodiola, relora, and ashwagandha. If you are on any medications, it's always recommended to talk with your doctor to make sure you can take herbs, because there can be interactions with herbs and medications, or even like medical conditions. So always double check that. Generally something like magnesium is pretty safe, but again, and before you start any supplements, just check with your doctor to make sure it's safe for you. Other than supplements, what are some other things? I just like looking at your general health status. So like, what's your vitamin D levels like? What's your omega-3 intake? These are two really important nutrients that we tend to lack in our diet, especially omega-3. So that's really good for cognitive health and cardiovascular health. Vitamin D is also good for the immune system, good for energy support. So checking on those two. And then a B complex is also great for helping with cortisol, because your B vitamins, your body uses them for so many different processes in your body, and your adrenal glands, they really do utilize those B vitamins. So B vitamins, vitamin C are great for the adrenal glands, and those are pretty easily to get, easily accessible to access B vitamins. Another tip about that is sometimes you want to just look at the form and the quality of the B vitamin. It's always good to know like where your supplements are sourced from. So generally a good quality B vitamin is going to have the activated B vitamins, so that means like they're methylated, so methylfolate and methyl B12, so your body doesn't actually have to do that. Some people actually have the deficiency in certain genes and enzymes, and they can't methylate or activate these vitamins, so it's helpful to just get them in an activated form. Yeah, so that's just a tip. So just to kind of recap, what can you do to help with lowering your cortisol? We talked about exercise, supplements, including a B complex, vitamin C, and then the herbs that are Relora, rhodiola, ashwagandha can be really beneficial. But yeah, okay. If anybody's just joining us, hi and welcome. I'm Dr. Amanda. I'm a naturopathic doctor. I host these live health Q&As to answer any health questions that you might have. So if you have any questions, whether it be about cortisol or something else, just feel free to drop it in the chat and I will be able to answer them for you. If you are new here, hi and welcome. I do these live health Q&As frequently, so just be sure to subscribe and turn on your notifications. So that way, when I go live next, you can get notified and come on and ask me any questions you have. All right. What else did we want to talk about in regards to cortisol? So I think when people, one main symptom that people think that makes them think that they might have a cortisol issue is when they're gaining weight, and that could be true, like gaining weight in the abdominal area can be due to a cortisol issue, but I would say just like clinically, I commonly see it more that being correlated with something like insulin resistance is a main issue that I see, and instead of cortisol causing that. I would say more people have insulin resistance and blood sugar issues versus having cortisol issues, if that makes sense. I think it's harder for your body to regulate your insulin and your blood sugar just based on diet and lifestyle versus like having issues with cortisol balance. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you have that weight gain in the abdominal area, maybe it is cortisol related, but I highly recommend looking into insulin levels and your blood sugar levels, because usually it's more frequently due to that. Yeah. Okay, question about what are the main drivers to cortisol imbalanced lifestyle? That's a great question. Yeah, I would say it comes down to just the way that you are able to handle stressful situations, handle changes in life, because if you're somebody that generally can have a pretty calm attitude and outlook, and you don't get anxious or overwhelmed by certain things, your body's gonna be able to keep your like nervous system at a calmer state, versus if you're somebody that's kind of always in that like fight or flight response and you're stressed out a lot, you get worked up easily out of things, then that can cause those like slow spikes in cortisol and potentially can contribute to that imbalance. In terms of lifestyle, yeah, like if you're not sleeping well, if you're going out late, if you're drinking a lot of alcohol, if you're not taking care of yourself in terms of your diet, you're having a lot of sugar in your diet, then this can also contribute to cortisol. So, but I would say it really comes down to just the way that you're able to just balance your overall lifestyle. So just making sure sleep, exercise, and diet are all pretty well balanced. All right, yeah, great question. So again, if anybody's just joining us, hi and welcome. I'm Dr. Amanda. I'm a naturopathic doctor. I host this live health Q&A to answer any health questions that you might have. So if you have questions about cortisol or something else, just feel free to drop it in the chat and I will be able to answer any of your health questions or concerns. Another thing with cortisol, so we talked about some ways that you can test for it. I would also say that in terms of looking at treatments and supplements and stuff for it, looking at the herbs, you might, like, let's say what some different herbs versus if you have a lower or a higher cortisol. So if your cortisol is chronically high on your blood work or your testing, then you would want to do herbs and things that are going to be more nourishing and grounding. So I mentioned Relora, so Relora is really good for that one. Holy basil, or also known as like Tulsi, is another really good one for helping just calm the nervous system and giving you a little bit of a gentle energy, but not going to be overstimulating. Whereas some herbs, like the ginseng herbs, they're quite strong and they might provide like too much of an intensity, maybe even cause like a paradoxical effect of giving you like anxiety as well. So I'd say to hold off on anything that contains the ginseng herbs. There's different types of ginseng because they're quite strong. So that's just something to keep in mind if you have higher cortisol. On the other hand, if you have low cortisol, a really good herb is licorice root. Now, if you have high blood pressure, it's usually recommended to avoid licorice root, but again, just double check with your doctor before you take anything. But licorice root is really good for the adrenal glands. It can help some of those lower symptoms of, those low cortisol symptoms like craving salt and feeling dizzy or having low blood pressure. Licorice root is really good for that. So it's a really great nourishing herb. So look into that one if you chronically have like the lower cortisol. Okay, so if anybody's just joining us, hi and welcome. I'm Dr. Amanda. I'm a naturopathic doctor. Thank you for the likes. I do appreciate that. It helps get the video noticed across our YouTube algorithm and helps more people join us and ask more questions. I'm talking tonight a little bit about cortisol, but ask me any other questions that you might have, whether that be other health topics, other health concerns, and I'll do my best to answer them in the chat for you. So in terms of the tests, so I talked about, the different types of like the blood work versus the urine versus the saliva. And a good thing about the blood work is if you're going to go get your blood work done for cortisol, you could add on a bunch of other tests that can be helpful. So we talked about how insulin, there's like a correlation with the insulin resistance and the cortisol imbalance. So checking your insulin through your blood work. Now this is different than checking glucose and A1C. So a lot of times those are the two standard. You get glucose and A1C, but you don't get your insulin checked. So I recommend, like, if you suspect you have potentially an imbalance in your insulin, if you have insulin resistance, getting your fasting insulin checked. So that's a good thing about getting blood work done, is you can add on so many other tests. You can check your hormones, you can check testosterone, estrogen levels. Those again are tightly regulated with cortisol as well. If you're going to do something like the urine or the saliva test, usually you'll just do the cortisol as a standalone. You can check the other hormones as well in your urine or saliva, but generally blood work is better for those ones. So that's just something to keep in mind if you wanted to get blood work done versus getting the other options done. Okay, so I'm just going to keep the chat open. If there's any questions, just feel free to drop them in the chat. The other thing with cortisol, the other like kind of hot topic I see online is like inflammation. What is inflammation, and if you have high cortisol, then you're inflamed. Now, I'd say that the term inflammation is really just thrown out there, and it's kind of just overhyped and over talked about a lot. And I would say that maybe you can have some inflammation going on in your body, but you probably don't generally have like chronic levels of inflammation. But what are some things you can do to just help with reducing, let's call it like an overactive nervous system or overactive immune system, and some of these things that might lead to higher inflammation levels? So we talked about diet already, so like a vegetables, fruits, meats, legumes, nuts, and seeds. That balanced diet can be helpful for lowering inflammatory markers or lowering inflammation in the body. The other thing is curcumin, turmeric. Turmeric is a really good anti-inflammatory herb. So a lot of times if there is an issue with cortisol, if there's an issue with other hormones being imbalanced, something like an anti-inflammatory approach can be beneficial to this. So looking into turmeric, which is the same thing as curcumin. It can be a really good anti-inflammatory. And then I talked a little bit about omegas. So omegas as well. Omegas are a great anti-inflammatory support, really good for cognitive health. So that would be your omega-3. We get enough of the other omega, like omega-6 and omega-9 in our diets. Generally, most people are low in omega-3. So looking into taking a curcumin or a turmeric supplement and omega-3 can also be beneficial for cortisol support and for anti-inflammatory support. All right, so right now I don't think there's any other questions in the chat box. If anybody's just joining us, hi and welcome. I'm Dr. Amanda. I'm a naturopathic doctor. I host this live health Q&A to answer any health questions that you might have. So feel free to drop your questions in the chat box and I will be able to answer them for you. And then of course, thank you so much for the likes. I do appreciate that. It helps the video get noticed across YouTube. So we were talking about cortisol. So we talked about, if anybody's just jumping in, or talked about the way your cortisol is throughout the days and the different types of tests and different types of supplements. So I talked a lot about Rolora, rhodiola, and ashwagandha, just for like general cortisol support. If you have high cortisol, holy basil is a good one. If you have low cortisol, licorice root is another good one. And then overall, an omega-3, turmeric or curcumin, and a B complex and vitamin C can be beneficial. And then magnesium. The other thing I wanted to talk about was, so you have cortisol, and then on the other hand, you have melatonin. That's your other hormone. So cortisol and melatonin are important for what's called your sleep-wake cycle. So I'll go over cortisol again, but cortisol is the one that like spikes up in the morning, and then it starts dipping in the afternoon, and then at nighttime it will be low. Whereas on the other hand, melatonin is the opposite. So melatonin will be low throughout the day, and then it starts spiking up in the evening, and like it peaks up at nighttime, and then drops in the early morning. So you want to think about the combination of these two. If you have difficulty falling asleep, if you feel like that wired and tired feeling at night before bed, that could be that the cortisol is high, but it could also be that your melatonin is low, or your melatonin is not high enough, because cortisol should be low in the evening and melatonin should be high. So you should be able to feel rested, getting ready for bed, feeling like you're going to be able to fall asleep. But if you're constantly having thoughts racing, feeling wired or jittery or restless, you could have an imbalance of both of the cortisol and the melatonin. So one thing to keep in mind that really impacts your melatonin production is the sunlight and artificial lights. So getting exposure to sunlight during the day can be really helpful for melatonin production. But then in the evening, you want to tune off all your electronics. And as I'm saying this, I'm realizing it's 9:45 p.m. and I'm on my phone, which is probably not going to be the best thing for my melatonin and my sleep cycle. But something to keep in mind, you want to try to avoid electronics like an hour before you go to bed. And because the artificial light that we get from our screens, that blue light, can really impact your body's melatonin. So you might not be having a high enough level of melatonin, and then you can have issues with falling asleep. And then it's actually going to be stimulating like the cortisol production, because it's going to be thinking that your body, sending signals to your body, they have to stay awake. So that's one thing to keep in mind is bright light during the day. If you can get outside, great. Like try to get bright light first thing in the morning. That's great for cortisol. And then in the evening, when you want to unwind, try to avoid phones and computers and screens, so that way your body's able to produce its melatonin. I always get questions about melatonin, like should I take melatonin? Can I take melatonin? And you shouldn't have to take melatonin. You want to work on some of these other things that I mentioned, like avoiding the screens. So that way your body produces enough, because you shouldn't have to, rely on the supplement to take it. If you do need to take it, I only recommend taking it short term because then it can interfere with other hormones in the body. It can interfere with your body's own production of melatonin. And especially if you're going to take melatonin, do it at a very low dose. 1 milligram, 2 milligrams, 3 milligrams. Do not take more than that. You should not be needing to take like 10 milligrams of melatonin to fall asleep. If you are having to take that much to fall asleep, then there's probably some other issues going on. Yeah, so that's just one thing to keep in mind in regards to cortisol and melatonin, because they work together and you kind of need to work on both of them. You can't just think of one without the other. So I do really think it's important to avoid those screens before nighttime. All right, I just went off talking a lot there, so I'm just going to take a second to take a break. If there's any questions, just feel free to comment them in the chat box. If you are just hopping on, welcome. I'm Dr. Amanda. I'm a naturopathic doctor. I host this live health Q&A to answer any health questions that you might have. So thank you for the likes. I do appreciate that. It helps get the video noticed across YouTube. And if you're just joining us and you're new here, be sure to subscribe and join our health community so you can get notified next time I go live. All right, so I'm just gonna hold the chat open for another minute or so. If there's any other questions, you can just feel free to ask me, and then if not, I'll wrap it up soon. And then the videos are always left on my channel, so if there's anything that I talked about today or maybe you joined a little bit later, if you wanted to go back and listen, the videos will be posted on, they're saved on my live channel, on my YouTube channel, so go check that out, because I talked a lot today about different herbs for cortisol, like what cortisol is, what it's important for, herbs and supplements and diet and exercise, and the difference between cortisol and melatonin, and then of course how you can check your cortisol levels. So go check it out if you missed any of that, and I think that's it for tonight. So thank you so much for listening, and of course be sure to subscribe, join our health community, and I will see you all in the next live stream.